So welcome back everybody, Mike here. It is December 1st, 2017, and it is a chilly morning here in Pennsylvania. Today's video is on how to sharpen your chainsaw by hand. And that has been one of the most requested videos over the last 6 months. And the reason is, I think it's very difficult to do. I mean, if you cut a lot of firewood or you know, you're in the woods clearing trees or things like that, you need to know how to sharpen your chainsaw. And I'll be honest, it took me probably 20 years to get to the point where I'm successful each and every time that I do it. And I can get a good sharp chain. It makes things so much easier when you're in the woods. So I've had a lot of requests for this type of video, like I said, and I didn't know really how I did it. You know, I mean, it took all those years to get to the point where I'm good. So I had to think over the last week or two what I do so I can try to convey that in this video, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. When I first started cutting firewood, I thought, I'll just grab a file, this will be easy. It's not easy at all. And I screwed up a bunch of chains when I was younger, and then I started taking them places because I get frustrated. And I had one guy, he seemed to do a pretty good job on them. It was like a hardware store. But then over time, I don't know if they got somebody different, but they'd kind of butcher them up as well. So a while back, I went back to sharpening myself, and I think I finally have it figured out. So the intent of this video is not to tell you what to do. I just want to show you how I do it, and it seems to work pretty well for me. So today we're going to use the Stihl chainsaw filing kit and the Stihl 2-in-1 sharpener. This little filing kit, kind of handy. That's pretty much it that comes in the Stihl chainsaw filing kit. What you have here is your file, and it has a guide on it. Now, personally, I take this guide off. I find it a little bit cumbersome, and I don't use it. So I'll be taking that off. You got your flat file for your depth gauges, and then you have this little important tool right here. This is a depth gauge tool, and I'll show you how to use this in a minute. Then we're going to use the Stihl 2-in-1 sharpener, and I've used this just a few times, and so far I love it. Like I said, it took me 20 years to just use a file to sharpen my saw, and I wish I would have had one of these years ago. I think it would have made things a lot easier, but we're going to go over both methods today. Now, when you look at the cutters on a chainsaw chain, you can see they're tapered. They're higher at this end, lower at this end. So as you sharpen these, and this cutter gets taken back some, these depth gauges need to come down as well. That's very critical. I'll show you how to do that. So you see these little lines on the cutter? That's the angle that you want to sharpen the chain on. And as you sharpen this over time, this cutter is going to come back some. So you always want to follow that line right there and make sure you keep your angle on that direction. And as this cutter comes back, you know, it's lower than the back than it is in the front. So every once in a while, about every third sharpening, I usually take my depth gauges down a little bit. So that's first. Always follow this angle. And on that little filing kit that I showed you, it has a guide, but after a little bit of time, I really didn't like using the guide. So I'm going to start sharpening this chain just with the hand file, and we'll go from there. I always start somewhere, so you know where you start and you know where you finish. You can either mark it with a marker. These chains have that little green link in there, so that's where I will start. It's best to use a vise, but when you're out in the field, that's not always an option. So I'm going to follow this line right here. I want to stay on that angle. And the other thing that's very important is you want your file to be at 90 degrees to the bar. So basically level, all right? And then make sure you do the same amount of strokes on each cutter. Always push away from you, don't pull back. Turn your file every once in a while. Knock the filings off of it. Something else to mention, when you're filing these chains, it's it's a normal tendency you're pushing down on it, but really these cutters, all the cutting's happening up in here. So if you keep this file level, you actually want to be lifting up a little bit, not as much pushing down. You want to sharpen this top part. That's where it does all the cutting. So if you keep this finger right here kind of underneath your file, you're kind of pushing up a little bit and not putting all your pressure on the bottom. So that's that one side. Now we're going to spin it around and do the other. I'm going to start here again. So you want to take your depth gauge tool, set it on top of the cutters. And then you see right here, that's your depth gauge. You want that depth gauge to be flush with this. Now that one's not bad at all. It's pretty good. If that were to stick up a little bit, you just take your flat file and just give it a couple strokes, and that will get it to the proper height adjustment. So that one's not bad at all. I just took a wee little bit off of there. Now I'm going to use the Stihl 2-in-1 sharpener. This does everything that the round file and flat file did, but it's all combined into one, and you can do everything with this. I'm going to start here in the same spot, give everything just one stroke. Make sure you have this thing flipped the right way, because you can get mixed up a little bit. See this arrow right here? You want to push away from you, keep it on the right angle. So that goes right in there. I'm on the proper angle, and I'm just going to give it one stroke. Just like that. Boy, this thing works nice. I've seen other videos where people use two hands on this. I kind of like just using one. I think I'm a little bit more precise that way. I don't know, but this is just the way I like doing it. Boy, this thing does work. These are pretty slick, I'm telling you. I hope you can see this, but look how that 2-in-1 file takes just a little bit off of that depth gauge. That is awesome, man. That thing works great. So remember, when you're using this, always make sure that you have this arrow up in the direction that you're going. See how that sits in there? These guides sit right on this other cutter. You've got this flat file in here that's taking down your depth gauges. This guide right here is sitting on the back of that cutter, and it keeps everything at the right height. Keep it 90 degrees to the bar and one stroke through like that, or however many. I just did one because I already sharpened this with just a round file. Okay, so in review, when you're sharpening these chains, say you're using a round file, you want the file to be perpendicular to your bar. That's very important. You don't want to be like this, and you don't want to be like that. You got to follow the right angle that's marked on the top of the cutters. And as you're filing, you want to put just a little bit of upward pressure. Don't force everything down low, because all your cutting happens up top here. After you get it sharp that way, then you come back through. You can use either that little depth gauge tool to take down your depth gauges a little bit, or if you use that 2-in-1, which at this point I highly recommend, you can do it all in one trick with that. Also, make sure that you hit each cutter the same number of strokes. You don't want to do 5 on one and 2 on another one and then flip the saw around and get it all mixed up. It'll be cutting crooked. You'll be all jacked up. So you don't want to do that. Same number of strokes. Keep it level. I call it level, perpendicular to the bar. Once you get them all sharp, make sure that your depth gauges are taken down a little bit, and I'm telling you, that will really be beneficial to you when you're in the woods. That's a sharp chain. I have those Stihl 2-in-1 sharpeners in my Amazon store. The link is in the description if you want one there. I actually bought mine at Rural King. It was much cheaper there, but if you don't have one of those stores or a Stihl dealer near you, you can go ahead and order it and they'll deliver it to your door. Normally, if I'm sharpening my chainsaw chain, it's out in the woods. That's why I did it on the tailgate here, the Ranger, or it might be on the 3-point carryall of my tractor. You can also get those little vices that you drive them down into a log if you want to do that. I don't really need to. Maybe that's your preference. But yeah, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but those are the keys to sharpening your chain, at least in my opinion. It works well for me. Keep that file 90 degrees to the bar, nice and level. Follow that right angle on the chain. Same number of strokes on each cutter. A little bit of upward pressure, not a lot, but you don't want to be driving that file down deep. You're not doing anything down there. All the cutting happens on the top. So a little bit of upward pressure, and if you do those things and then get your depth gauges to the right height with either the depth gauge tool or the 2-in-1, you'll have a sharp chain. It'll take a little bit of practice, and don't be embarrassed if you can't do it. Like I said, it took me 20 years to figure it out. I don't know why it took so long, but it's just not an easy thing to do. But once you get onto it, it makes things so much easier when you're cutting wood, and it puts a smile on your face when you have a nice sharp chain. So anyway, that's it for today's video. I hope this was helpful. I really do, because I thought a lot about this. It's hard to explain how to do certain things when it just comes naturally after a long time to come naturally, but when it's hard to explain sometimes. So if you have any questions or you want something in a follow-up video, I could always put a little, add a little piece in another video. But that's it. If you enjoy these videos, please click subscribe and hit the like button and share them with your friends. Thanks.